Nerds, this is Chris, and this is going to be another Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire video, and today we're going to talk about magic. That's right, magic in Westeros. What the hell is it? Where did it come from? Why is it there? Has it always been there? Is it getting stronger? So let's jump right in and talk about the world of ice and Dracarys, because that sounds cool. So, magic in Westeros. It's going to be a lot of speculation because we really don't know a whole lot about it, but I think we can ask some major questions to kind of dig in a little bit and get your thoughts as well. So the first major question I would ask is, why the hell is magic getting stronger in our world in the first place? And of course that leads to the question, why did it fade out in the first place? So I think we'd all agree there's probably been a low level of magic to a degree in our world because there's always been wargs and skin changers and woods witches, shadow binders, etc. So I think certain people, even without magical blood in their veins like Starks or Targaryens, probably have the ability, if they want to learn some kind of magical spells or wizardry or sorcery or whatever the hell you want to label it. But we do have pretty specific examples that magic is growing in our world and getting stronger once again, because it's implied that it used to be and kind of went away for a long time and kind of became a thing of legend or myth. A couple of examples of that. One would be obviously the return of the Others, or the White Walkers. They seem to be magical creatures. Some people think they were humans, or at least used to be, but obviously they're pretty fucking magical if they can manipulate ice and raise people from the dead. The other obvious sign would be dragons themselves. And of course Dany had her magical moment, brought dragons back to the world, and that seemed to be the counterbalance to the White Walkers because they did come first in our story. Another example, at least in the books, is the glass candles. Now, glass candles are not featured on the show at all, but in the books, glass candles are basically obsidian or dragon glass candles that have no actual wick, I guess, or wax. And even the maesters try to light a glass candle during their studies as they try to get their Valyrian steel link in the Citadel. But glass candles is how, in the books at least, that Quaithe communicates with Dany, and as well as some other people who are around Dany advising her, tell her about glass candles and how they're working again. One specific example is, like I just mentioned, Quaithe. In one of her moments where she's sending messages to Dany through her dreams, she starts off this quote by saying the glass candles are burning. Another example as far as glass candles go is a guy named Zorro, who again is not in the show, is a book only character. He tells Dany, "It is said that the glass candles are burning in the house of Urathon Nightwalker that have not burned in 100 years. And again, that's Zorro telling Dany about that, so that's telling you right there straight up, they haven't worked in 100 damn years, which happens to be about the time the last dragons died out. And one of our main examples that you can relate to for show only watchers is of course Melisandre. She basically says that her powers are getting stronger, especially while she's near the wall. In A Dance with Dragons, in her only chapter, one quote specifically states, "The carved chest that she had brought across the narrow sea was more than 3/4 empty now, and while Melisandre had the knowledge to make more powders, she lacked many rare ingredients. My spells should suffice. She was stronger at the wall, stronger even now than a shy. Her every word and gesture was more potent. She could do things she had never done before. Such shadows as I bring forth here will be terrible, and no creature of the dark will stand before them. With such sorceries at her command, she should soon have no more need of the feeble tricks of alchemists and pyromancers." So that's telling you right there that Melisandre used to have to use a lot more parlor tricks to kind of convince people of her religion, although she did have real power. But she uses powders and tricks, etc. to make, flames burn a certain color or a certain color smoke or whatever, just to kind of convince people like Stannis that he is Azor Ahai and the power of her god R'hllor is real. But as she is now at the wall, she's saying basically, I have no more need for these tricks. Now my power is really coming to fruition. I can do things I've never done before. So it's pretty obvious and pretty established, I think, that magic is getting stronger. But why? So one option we have is it's just something that simply exists. It's just a cyclical thing and it comes and goes. Just like in our world, our seasons come and go. But this may just be as simple as, sometimes in history for a couple hundred years, magic's a really powerful thing and then it kind of fades away for a while. It could be that it faded away 100 years ago after the dragons died, which seems to be implied in a lot of these examples, but it could be that it comes and goes naturally regardless of dragons, and dragons are simply a result of that as well. In our world, we have superstitions that are just not true, shit we see on TV. I mean, it's the reason we like fantasy. It's the reason we like dragons and unicorns and fucking leprechauns. In this world that George R. R. Martin has created, these things actually do exist. So I think personally it's probably just a natural cyclical thing that's always been there. Now, of course, the other option would be that some kind of person or event caused magic to kind of fade out from the world. So what would that be? Well, we do get a hint from that as well from a character in the books only that's not in the show at all, and we'll see if he shows up in the show in season 6, and that is Marwyn the Mage. Now, Marwyn the Mage is an archmaester at the Citadel, and he actually meets Sam in the books when he arrives to the Citadel to start studying for his maester's chain and to find out about the White Walkers. So Marwyn the Mage is convinced, and this is where the theory comes from, that the maesters are anti-magic and anti-dragon, therefore anti-Targaryen, and they have done something to get rid of it because they really don't understand it, they really can't control it, so therefore they don't like it. just like in the real world. And speaking of the glass candles, Marwyn the mage has a glass candle burning, so he obviously knows how to light the damn thing. But Marwyn the mage specifically tells Sam, who do you think killed all the dragons the last time around? Gallant dragon slayers armed with swords? The world the Citadel is building has no place in it for sorcery or prophecy or glass candles, much less for dragons. Ask yourself why Aemon Targaryen was allowed to waste his life upon the wall, when by rights he should have been raised to Archmaester. His blood was why. He could not be trusted, no more than I can. And that was Marwyn the mage telling Sam straight up, Maesters don't like this shit. They don't like it, they don't like dragons, and they don't like Targaryens because they control dragons. Another thing to feed this theory a little bit is Maester Luwin when he's telling Bran in season 1 or book 1 that, you know, magic, yeah, it's not a real thing. I tried this shit when I was at the Citadel, but that's something that may have been around a long time ago, but all that bullshit no longer works if it ever did. There's no such thing as, you know, White Walkers, you know, that's just an old man's stories. But it is certainly a possibility that the Maesters are involved with the reason magic went away in the first place. So if it's not a natural cyclical thing where it kind of wanes in and out of existence, what caused magic to go away in the first place? Could it be that a person or an event caused that? Possibly. So I wrote down a few ideas and I want to get your input on it. One of the things I wrote down was Jon's birth. Now Jon was about 14 years old in a Game of Thrones, so you could say that Jon's birth being an ice and fire child, if you do follow R plus L equals J, being the first of its kind basically, except for kind of Bloodraven. He was kind of an ice and fire child along with his sisters. After all, he is called the Song of Ice and Fire by Rhaegar himself when he is talking to his wife in Dany's visions in the House of the Undying. This kind of goes along the lines that the White Walkers we know were active before the dragons, so potentially the White Walkers are reacting to this ice and fire child being born who is supposed to be this savior, so to speak. And with this savior being reborn, they somehow sensed it or what have you, then they need to take action and build an army of the dead to take over before he can come to fruition and do what he's supposed to do according to prophecy, if prophecy is a real thing in our story, which I'm really starting to believe it's not. Another event that I thought could possibly be a trigger for magic coming back to the world was when Aerys II, the Mad King, Dany's father, killed Brandon Stark and his father Rickard Stark when they went to King Aerys to demand Lyanna be returned, the event that essentially caused Robert's Rebellion. I don't really have anything to back that up. I'm just kind of thought about, you know, this was the first time that a Targaryen that I know of killed a Stark, and perhaps that was some kind of imbalance thing and nature simply reacted somehow. Perhaps there was some ancient unspoken pact that was broken with that, being ice and fire with the two magical families. So unlikely, but just an idea. Another thing I thought about as far as being a catalyst to bring magic back in the world was Mance Rayder. I believe it was one of Jon's chapters that Ygritte tells Jon that Mance Rayder was raiding tombs, essentially, or raiding graves, I should say, north of the wall, to find the Horn of Jormungand, otherwise known as the Horn of Winter. This supposedly wakes giants from the earth and perhaps brings down the wall. Perhaps these graves up north were of some importance, perhaps, you know, something related to the White Walkers or the others, and was the catalyst to bring magic back. Another thought is simply the Red Comet, you know, the bleeding star that everybody saw during season 1 on the show, and was of course around during the first book of Game of Thrones in the series. The Red Comet, of course, is commonly associated being the bleeding star of the prophecy of Azor Ahai, or Prince that was promised, but it could be simply just something similar to our own world where, say, like solar flares affect everything here, where it comes by every so often, every couple hundred years, whatever it is, and perhaps just naturally sparks the resurgence of magic. Another thought I had was the tragedy of Summerhall. We don't really know what happened, but basically it was a big fire that killed a lot of Targaryens. Yes, Targaryens can burn. What we do know about Summerhall, we believe, is that it was an attempt to bring dragons back into the world by Aegon V Targaryen. Nobody really knows what really happened there. It's kind of a mystery, but it could be the fact that Aegon V was trying to bring dragons back into the world, at least the attempt to do so, perhaps triggered something on the ice side as far as what we associate with ice in the White Walkers or the others as some kind of counterbalance to that. This duality thing they got going on in the story, that perhaps, you know, the catalyst for magic coming back as far as on the ice side could have possibly been caused by an event on the fire side, being the possible reemergence of dragons. Now, apparently that didn't work, so I don't know why that would trigger that, but just a thought. Perhaps the ice side, as far as the White Walkers or others or whatever we associate with the ice side, kind of got the feeling, wait a minute, they're trying to bring fucking dragons back into the world. We don't like that shit. We better get busy and start building our army of the dead and take these fuckers out before they actually succeed in this endeavor to bring dragons back. And one more thought I had on an event that would possibly bring magic back would be Robert's Rebellion itself. This is a war that started after Lyanna was supposedly abducted, which I believe she went willingly with Rhaegar Targaryen and married him and had Jon Snow. But I believe that perhaps the war itself, being that it lasted a pretty short amount of time, I believe it was described as under a year, there was a lot of people that died during that war, and as we know, blood seems to have a lot to do with magic in our story. 14 or 15 years before our story began, that could have been when the White Walkers started coming back and other things started happening as far as magic goes, a catalyst of it. A lot of literal blood was spilled. Thousands and thousands of people died because Rhaegar made the choice to marry Lyanna or whatever happened there, and that could have potentially triggered magic coming back into the world, or at least growing stronger. We have a few hints about that. One specifically I talked about before my Bloodraven video was a Brienne chapter in A Feast for Crows, where she has to kill a couple guys that she comes across, and she has to kill them specifically under a weirwood tree. There was no other reason to put that in there as far as the piece about the weirwood tree in this chapter, because she could have just killed them anywhere, wherever she ran across them when she was out looking for Sansa when she had Podrick Payne with her. But George R. R. Martin specifically put in the book that they were under a weirwood tree when she had to kill this guy, and of course his lifeblood leaked out and probably fed the trees. Another thing we have to support this is that Bran obviously saw these visions in A Dance with Dragons when he finally reached Bloodraven. The last vision in the first set of visions he saw a blood sacrifice, which I believe to be the founding of Winterfell from the first men, and that tells you right there that blood has been used to feed essentially the werewood.net network, and perhaps all that as far as blood feeds into the magical world. And of course we have Melisandre, who thinks that king's blood has special power. Now, I've always questioned the king thing, because what makes a king? Well, somebody just says I'm the fucking king. Basically, they take the throne by force, or somebody's born into a family that already is a king. They're considered royalty, but of course their family probably took it by force at some point too. So I'm not really sure what makes king's blood special, but obviously it does. Melisandre had to prove that to Stannis before he actually burned people alive. At least he had the decency to get proof before he started burning people. But she proves it with the leeches of king's blood, and 3 things happen, like Joffrey's death, etc. She does seem to have some real power with that blood. When she burns people, things do happen. Now, whether she's misinterpreting things or not is a whole different story, but I think blood is definitely a strong factor in how magic works in our world. So it's possible that since that Robert's Rebellion spilled literally tons and tons of blood, that it could have been kind of a catalyst to kind of reawaken magic in our magical world. Now, the third major question I would ask about magic in our world would be, what is the source of actual magic? You have basically 2 options here. You have gods or deities, and you have just being a natural thing that exists in the world. As far as the gods go, I think that people, just like in the real world, and this is where George R. R. Martin's beliefs probably come into our story a little bit, people label things they don't understand evil or magic based on their own beliefs, how they were brought up, etc. So they think that this type of magic is due to this god, and this type of magic is due to that god. So I personally don't believe that R'hllor, the Red God, the Great Other, the old gods for that matter, the Drowned God, the Storm God, any of the gods or deities in the story are actually real. I think that most anybody can learn to tap into some sort of magical abilities, for example, the woods witches, or, you know, somebody learning to light glass candles and send messages or dreams, etc. But of course you have the Targaryens and the Starks, are 2 magical houses. I definitely want to hear from you guys back on this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I have a lot more planned. As well for Bacall's Views with Val from Bacall's Geek, so be sure to check that out. In the meantime, you can click here for the last video I did for you Star Wars nerds, which is essentially a episode 8 top 10 wish list. And you can also click here for the last video I did on Game of Thrones, on Bloodraven, and what I think he's up to, and some more speculation about what his motives are, what his end game is, etc. So let me know what you think, guys. Really appreciate all the support. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.